Steve Smith was a beast. At 5'9", 185 pounds, Smith had to fight and scrap for every opportunity, dating back to his days at University High School in Los Angeles, where despite excelling as a running back and defensive back, he wasn't highly recruited. Viewed as undersized and too fiery, Smith would ironically use these qualities to his advantage throughout his career. With scholarship aspirations, Smith enrolled at Santa Monica Community College, where he was teammates with future NFL star Chad Ochocinco. Smith was originally recruited to play defensive back, but was switched to wide receiver after getting beat deep in an All-Star game. Over the next 2 years, he refined his football skills and focused on academics, before transferring to Utah, where he played for another 2 seasons. Smith was enjoying a highly productive first season as a U, until he suffered an injury scare towards the end of the year, which nearly derailed his career. The injury occurred against BYU, when Smith unknowingly broke his neck on a hit during a punt return. He shockingly finished that game, but x-rays afterward revealed that he had damaged his vertebrae, and doctors gave him a 50-50 chance of making a full recovery. But in typical Smith fashion, he beat the odds. Once healed, Smith resumed excelling as a returner and a receiver. In his 2 seasons at Utah, he accumulated 3,020 all-purpose yards and 16 total touchdowns, 12 receiving, and 4 via punt return. Heading into the 2001 draft, he was ranked the 11th best wide receiver in his class, and was projected to go somewhere between the 5th and 7th round. Smith, of course, felt that he was a first-round talent. He would ultimately end up being taken by the Carolina Panthers in the 3rd round with the 74th pick, and the rest, as they say, is history. You couldn't script a more perfect beginning. On the first play of his career, Smith returned the opening kickoff of the first game of the season for a touchdown, and would remain one of the lone bright spots for a Carolina Panthers team that would finish 1-15. Despite not seeing the field much outside of special teams his rookie year, Smith took advantage of his opportunities and had a huge impact. He ended up leading all rookies with 1,994 all-purpose yards and earned both the first-team All-Pro bid and a Pro Bowl nod as a returner. In his sophomore campaign, Smith would be named a starting wide receiver and continued returning kicks as well, finishing the year with 54 receptions for 872 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, and had an additional 2 scores through punt returns. However, year 3 would be Smith's official breakout season, when he compiled 88 receptions for 1,110 yards and 8 total touchdowns, en route to helping the Panthers capture their first NFC title in franchise history. Smith's stellar regular season play would carry over to the postseason, highlighted by a game-winning 69-yard touchdown in double overtime against the Rams in the divisional round. The Panthers would reach the Super Bowl and nearly pulled off the upset against the heavily favored Patriots. Smith would finish the game with 4 receptions for 80 yards and 1 touchdown, and had a kick return for an additional 30 yards. While the loss certainly hurt, there was unfortunately more bad news in the pipeline. Smith would suffer a season-ending leg fracture in the opening game of the following season, and would be forced to keep the bad taste in his mouth from the Super Bowl loss for another year. Many doubted Smith would be able to return to form coming off of the injury, but in typical Smith fashion, he quieted the doubters, getting off to a blistering start in 2005, racking up 903 receiving yards and 9 receiving touchdowns through the first 8 weeks. Teams began zeroing in on him quite a bit more in the second half of the season, which impacted his production, but not enough to prevent him from making history. He would not only go on to win Comeback Player of the Year, but he also captured the coveted Triple Crown title, leading the league in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. And in the process, joined elite company in Jerry Rice and Sterling Sharp as the only 2 other players at the time to win the award in the Super Bowl era. Smith would prove it was no fluke and dominated in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, catching 22 passes for 302 yards and 3 receiving scores, and added an additional rushing score for good measure. Unfortunately, he and the Panthers would run out of steam in the championship game and would have their postseason cut short. Smith did still manage to return a punt for a touchdown, however it was too little too late. The next few seasons would be volatile, and due to constant uncertainty at the quarterback position, the Panthers would struggle to consistently build contending teams, costing Smith much of his prime in the process. But even with a carousel at quarterback, Smith continued to play well year after year. However, as he got older, his patience began to wear, and the Panthers also wanted to go in a younger, more cost-effective direction. Thus, after 13 years in Carolina, Smith was released. He ended up signing with the Baltimore Ravens and was still shockingly productive for a veteran receiver, eclipsing 1,000 yards in his first season. He was off to another strong start in year 2 before suffering a torn Achilles in week 8. Determined not to end his career on a sour note, he decided to play one more year. And at 37 years old, he put up a respectable 70 reception, 799 yard, 5 touchdown line. Smith retired with 1,031 receptions, 14,731 receiving yards, and 81 receiving touchdowns. The receptions are 12th most all time, the yards are 8th, and the touchdowns are tied for 22nd. He also holds numerous records for Carolina, including the most receiving yards and total touchdowns in Panthers history. While he hasn't been enshrined yet, Smith was a finalist for the 2025 Hall of Fame class and will likely be inducted in the coming years. Smith truly defied the odds and refused to back down from anyone. And in my opinion, he is the greatest ex-receiver under 5'10" ever, and arguably the biggest trash talker in NFL history. What's more is that Smith's mouth never wrote checks that his play couldn't cash. I want to thank you for watching, and I would love to hear your thoughts on Agent 89.